If you're looking to get into photography, the EOS 800D offers some great features. If you haven't already seen it, in our previous video we went over some of the buttons and the basic features of this camera. In this particular video we're going to have a look at some of the advanced settings that will allow us to really unlock our creative photography. One of the great features of this camera is the guided display on the back. It allows me to get an explanation essentially of what I am changing. So as I change functions, I'm getting a message on the screen giving me details of how that will affect my creative outcome. The guided display is also very handy because it is a touchscreen. At any stage, if I want to change something, I can simply hit the Q button, put my thumb on the option that I would like to change it using the multi-scroll wheel on the top, and lock away that change with my finger. So let's look at some of the semi-automatic modes in this camera. Firstly, I'm going to start with AV, which stands for aperture value. Just up on top of the camera, we located our mode dial in the last video. If we change this to AV, we now have the opportunity to play with our depth of field. What does that all mean though? Let's have a closer look. To change our aperture, we can either use the touchscreen and swipe, or we can use the top multi-function dial to turn that up or turn it down. Let's start with a low aperture and have a look at how that works. If I select our blue object in the center here and take a photo at an aperture of f5, for example, we end up with a very shallow depth of field. You'll notice that the foreground and background are blurred. This would be fantastic if you're taking portraits in the park, for example, and you want a mute background, bringing the viewer's eye's attention to the portrait itself. Adversely, if we want all of the figurines in focus at the same time, we can dial our aperture up to as far as, say, even f22. Taking the same photo, we can see in playback now all four of our objects are clearly in focus. So the next feature we're going to look at is TV. Up on top of our mode dial here, we just need to turn that back to TV. TV stands for time value, and it's measured in seconds and fractions of a second. Again, the two ways to change TV mode is either use the touchscreen and swipe to the right to slow the frame down, or to the left to speed the frame up. Adversely, we can also use the top scroll wheel to increase or decrease our shutter speed. Let's have a look at TV mode in action. With our shutter speed set to a 500th of a second and our figurine moving, our camera should be able to take a photo of this object as though it is standing still. On the other end of the scale, if we slow it down to say a 1/10 of a second and start the same motion and take a photo, we should clearly end up with a photo that shows movement. A couple of options as to where we might use these. If we were shooting high-speed sport, for example, soccer, rugby league, we might choose to use a faster shutter speed to be able to capture the moment in action. If we were shooting motor cars, we may choose a slower shutter speed to enable effects like panning, for example, to really show motion in our subject. To change the AF points on this model, we have two options. Firstly, we can use our right thumb to select the AF mode function, and then rotating to the top, you'll notice a AF point selection button, which will allow us, by pressing once, to cycle through the various AF point options. The alternate is we can still activate that screen with our right thumb, then simply use our finger, being that it's a touch screen, to select the mode that we're after. For example, in one-point mode here, I have the opportunity to move that focus point to any point of the frame which I wish to have the focal point. I can also use my finger to select the point specifically. At any stage, if I want to go back to the center quickly, I can simply hit set in the middle of the four multifunction dials, and it'll bring that AF point straight back to the center. So just to expand on those autofocus functions, apart from single point, you also have other options such as 9-point, which is an expansion of single point. Think of it as a bit of a safety net. Great for shooting birds, for example, because you don't know which way they're going to go from center. Some of the other options here also is a large zone, which incorporates 15 autofocus points. And then lastly, auto selection AF, which will choose from all of the autofocus points dependent on the subject you're shooting. Let's talk a little bit more in depth about white balance. In our previous video, we located the button just here. And within this menu, we can actually change our white balance 3 different ways. We can either select left and right To go through the options, we can use the multi-function dial on top to cycle through them, or we can select with the touchscreen. So let's have a look at what some of the white balance settings are and how they affect our photo. Here in live view, we have our figurine, and if we use the Q button here, which enables our touchscreen, we can select the white balance, which is located up the top right here. And down the bottom here gives us our options: auto white balance, sun, which won't look too much different to auto white balance at this stage given the light that we're in. Shade, which will warm the scene significantly. Cloudy will also warm the scene, but not as significantly as shade. Tungsten will certainly make that scene look cold and blue. Fluorescent, also cool, not quite as cool as tungsten. And flash, which is very close to sunlight as well. Auto white balance does a great job of getting the right color temperature for you, given the environment that you're in. Some of the reasons you may want to change white balance though, is if you want to put a cool or warm mood across your frame, really influencing the viewer at home. Let's have a look at the drive mode functions on this camera. In the previous video, we located this button to the left on the rear. It's signified by 3 boxes. By pressing this, again, we can cycle through using our left and right arrows, or as I like to do, use my finger with the touchscreen. So for example, single shooting mode means I push the button once and it takes 1 photo. If I use high speed burst, for example, it allows me to take multiple photos in rapid fire. Great for sporting. Other options that we have here in our drive mode is the 10-second self timer. Perfect for the family portrait where the camera's on a tripod and you need to push the button and run around and join the family for the photo. Another one also there is the 2-second self timer, which is very handy if you're doing a long exposure at night time and you have your tripod but you've forgotten your remote release. You can push the button to take a photo, it'll count to 2 and then release the shutter. A little earlier in the basic video we talked about picture styles. Located at the bottom here, our picture styles in the camera allow us to change some of the contrast, saturation and brightness modes that our camera has built in. For example, some of the picture styles that are here are auto, standard, portrait, landscape, fine detail, neutral, faithful and monochrome. One of the ones I'd really like to show you is monochrome. A lot of people ask us how to take black and white photos with your camera. What I've done is I've set this camera up, looking at our figurine here, and selected the monochrome picture styles. You can see on the screen immediately we are seeing a black and white image. It's worth pointing out at this time that if we were shooting RAW, it will still record the color in the image when we download on our computer. However, if we do shoot JPEG, that file is locked in as a black and white file forever. Like many of the EOS models, this is a live view enabled camera. The button is located here to the left of the mode dial, and by pressing it once, it will automatically open the live view function. Now the live view function is pretty cool. There's a few things you can do here. Firstly, I'd like to point out touch focus. If we have our scene here, all I need to do is use one finger to tap on the most important part of that scene, in this case being our figurine, and the camera will automatically get focus on that point until we release the shutter. The cool thing about this touch shutter too is if I move the camera, it will actually track and follow the person or the item that I have selected. As also mentioned, this model is a video-enabled DSLR. To get to our video mode, you'll remember from the first video, all we need to do is push up on our on button, which automatically takes us into video mode. 2 really cool features within the video mode on this model. Firstly is the touch AF, allowing me to select quickly and precisely the point of focus within my frame. Secondly is if that object were to move within my frame during the video, the tracking AF will actually follow that object the entire time. To start or stop our recording, the live view button doubles as our start stop button within the video mode. Simply push the button once, you'll notice a red dot appear at the top right, and it is completely normal to see the memory card access light flashing, showing that the memory card is in use currently. A couple of other key bits of information on the screen at the moment. At the top left, we have a total time of recording, and down the bottom here is our exposure compensation. So if I find that this scene is too light or too dark, I can simply touch that screen and dial it up to be brighter or turn it down to become darker. To stop the video again, I simply need to hit the start stop button, and I'm ready to start our next scene. Another cool feature within the video modes is video snapshot mode. To get to this, all we need to do is hit menu whilst we're in the video function, and under the red menus, using the touchscreen, the 5th menu across, you will find video snapshot mode at the top. We can enable this and then select the length of video that we would like to snapshot. This limits us in this case to 4 seconds per video and will allow us to put these 4-second videos together in a series, which can be great for social media. The last feature we're going to talk about within the video modes on this model is time-lapse. It has a built-in time-lapse function which allows you to make and create files in camera to share on social media instantly. To get to it, all we got to do is hit menu. In the red menus here, across number 5, right below video snapshot, you'll see time-lapse. And using the touchscreen, I'm going to enable time-lapse. I can see at the top here, we've got a little bit of information about our frame rate and quality, which is all adjustable. But mainly with time-lapse, we need to select our interval, and this can be anywhere up to hours. At the moment, I've got it set for 4 seconds. And down the bottom here, before I hit OK, it's giving me an indication of how long it's going to take to shoot this time-lapse and what the playback time is going to be. So for example, with this 4-second interval, 100 frames is going to take a little over 6.5 minutes, and it's going to yield a time-lapse video which will play back for 4 seconds. So I can adjust this interval. I can also adjust how many total frames, and I've got that reference data at the bottom of the screen. So if I know I want a 4-second time-lapse, for example, I can see that 100 frames at 4-second intervals will yield the size file that I have required. Once we're happy with everything there, we can hit menu to go back, press record, and it will begin our time-lapse for the next 4.5 minutes. Another one of the settings within the time-lapse mode is whether you would like the exposure fixed to the first frame or for the camera to do adjustments throughout the entire series of frames. To do so, we just come down to auto exposure. Again, using my touchscreen, I can select between fixed first frame, which will lock down the exposure for the entire time-lapse. Fixed first frame option means that it will do the exposure based on the very first frame in the time-lapse, and it'll lock that exposure down for the entire time-lapse. So for example, at sunset, we may start with the correct exposure, and over the time that it's doing that, it will fade to black. The other option is for it to do the auto exposure on each individual frame. In doing so, what it will do at sunset is ramp up the exposure. So as the sun goes down, the ISO will increase to compensate. So one of the topics we need to ask is, should I be shooting RAW or JPEG? And we'll notice in our shooting settings within the menu system on this model, the very first option on the camera is image quality. And if we have a quick look at this, we have a lot of JPEG options and a RAW option. What's the difference, you're probably asking? There are people who are for JPEG, people are for RAW. If you're undecided, there is an option here which will allow you to record RAW and JPEG of each photo to your memory card. A really quick explanation for you though, a JPEG file is pre-compressed in camera. Great for quick sharing. For those who don't want to mess around with post-production, get a photo and put it straight out there to print or to social media. As where a RAW file is really important for those who like to use photo manipulation software and enhance their photos or develop them before sharing. Either way, this camera will allow you to shoot JPEG or RAW, or as I sometimes do, shoot RAW and JPEG together and decide later. Like all cameras, there's a playback function. Down the bottom right-hand corner here, you will find the playback button, which will allow you to see the images and movies that are on the memory card. If I just cycle back here for a moment to one of the images, a couple of ways we can zoom in on this image. Firstly, there is a plus and minus key at the top right-hand corner, which will allow us to zoom in and zoom out. Or we can just use the touchscreen and pinch zoom to be able to check the focus on our frame before continuing on. To get out of playback mode, we can either hit the playback mode key again, or we can tap the shutter as though we're about to take another photo, and it will instantly come back ready to shoot again. Well, I hope this video has helped you learn a little bit more about the 800D and has given you the confidence to get out there and get creative with your photography.